All right, get ready because we're gonna dive deep into a story. I think it's gonna change how you think about World War One. We're talking about the Harlem Hellfighters, an all-black unit facing crazy odds, and we're going way beyond, that like typical textbook stuff you might have heard before. You know what I mean? We've got articles, insights from museums, firsthand accounts. We've got it all to really bring this forgotten part of history back to life.
What gets me is the context. Imagine the U.S. in the early 1900s, right? Deep in segregation. Now picture this. Over 350,000 African Americans served in World War I. But most were stuck doing non-combat roles.
Like what? What kind of stuff?
Digging trenches, building roads. Essential work, but, far from the front lines.
It's almost like they were fighting two wars, right? One overseas and one back home against prejudice.
Exactly. And that fight for equality, it's woven into. Like every part of the Harlem Hellfighters story. They were formed right there in Harlem. Originally as the 15th New York National Guard Regiment. These weren't just soldiers, they were a community, united by shared experiences and this burning desire to prove their worth.
So they had this incredible bond going in. Did that help them when they fought?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even before they got to Europe, they faced a real setback. The famous Rainbow Division, a National Guard unit, refused to include them. They said, black is not a color in the rainbow.
Wow.
Talk about setting the tone.
And that's just infuriating. Like they weren't even given a chance
Yeah.
to, prove themselves.
Yeah, it gets even crazier. When they arrived in France in December of 1917, they weren't allowed to train or fight under American command.
Really?
They were assigned to the French army, partly because of the prejudice from some American officers.
Can you imagine that?
Fighting for a country that won't even let you fight alongside your own countrymen.
It's mind-blowing. But they didn't get demoralized, did they? They kind of used it as fuel.
Exactly, they thrived under French command, quickly proving themselves in early battles like the Champagne-Marne defensive and the Aisne-Marne offensive.
Hold on. When you say defensive, what do you mean?
Think of it as holding a strategic position against enemy attacks.
Right.
And an offensive. That's when you're pushing forward, taking ground. They were good at both.
Okay, so they're already defying expectations, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Right.
They're about to head into one of the most brutal battles of the whole war.
You're talking about the Meuse-Argonne offensive. This was rough. Imagine fighting nonstop for like over 6 months. That's what the Hellfighters faced. 191 days in continuous combat, more than any other American unit, and the casualties were staggering 1,400. But even with all that chaos, they were key to important victories.
1,400 casualties. It's hard to even fathom. But they weren't just surviving. They were achieving some really important goals. I remember reading about them capturing a railroad junction. Why was that such a big deal?
Okay, so think of it like this. That railroad junction was the enemy's lifeline, their supply chain.
Yeah.
By capturing it, the Hellfighters really messed up the German war effort. This wasn't just about holding the line. They were directly impacting how the war was going. And remember all of this while facing, terrible prejudice from some of their own countrymen.
Man, it makes their accomplishments even more impressive. They were fighting on multiple fronts in a very literal sense. But let's talk about individual acts of heroism for a second. I've heard incredible stories, especially about Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts. They were both awarded the Croix de Guerre, right, for bravery.
Oh yeah, their story is legendary. Picture this. A moonless night, they're on patrol, vastly outnumbered by a German raiding party. Armed with just rifles and grenades, they fought like crazy, repelling attack after attack.
I remember reading about Johnson using a bolo knife. Was that during this fight?
Yes. Roberts was severely wounded, and Johnson, out of ammo, grabs a bolo knife, it's a Filipino blade, and charges into the remaining Germans.
Wow.
It was brutal, desperate, hand-to-hand combat, and against all odds, they won.
That image is so powerful. The sheer will to survive, to protect your comrade, using whatever you have. It makes you realize the kind of courage these men had.
And remember, this bravery was recognized by the French. Both Johnson and Roberts received the Croix de Guerre, one of France's highest military honors. It's a big contrast to the treatment they often got from their own country.
It really makes you think, I mean, here they are risking their lives for a country that barely acknowledges their existence, and then they're, being honored by France for incredible bravery.
Really says a lot about their character, wouldn't you say? But the Hellfighters story goes beyond the battlefield. They also made a huge impact culturally.
Yeah.
Particularly with their regimental band led by James Reese Europe.
Right, the band. I'd love to hear more about them. James Reese Europe, he was pretty famous even before the war, right?
Oh yeah, he was a real trailblazer. Already a successful band leader in New York, Europe enlifted with the 369th. He believed in the power of music, not just to boost morale, but to break down barriers.
So he saw music as a weapon against prejudice, a way to connect with people on a deeper level.
Exactly. And this wasn't your, like, typical marching band. They were playing ragtime, jazz, blues music that, had the energy of Harlem, the heart of African American culture. And get this, they introduced this music to Europe.
Oh, wow. So you're in Europe, right? Maybe you've never even heard of jazz, and then suddenly you're swept up in this vibrant, infectious music. What an experience.
Yeah, their performances were electrifying. They drew huge crowds, soldiers and civilians. You could say they were on a cultural mission, spreading the joy and power of jazz wherever they went. It's even said they helped start the jazz craze that took over Europe.
So they're fighting for their country, defying racial barriers, bringing like a whole new musical era to the world. It's amazing how much they accomplished with everything stacked against them.
It really is a remarkable story. But it does raise some tough questions. Why were they forgotten for so long? Why did it take decades for America to, acknowledge their sacrifices?
Well, it's a reminder that history isn't always simple, right? There are hidden stories, voices that get, silenced or overlooked.
You're right. The Harlem Hellfighters experience, it shows a lot about, the power dynamics at play both during the war and in the years after. Their contributions didn't fit the prevailing narrative, so they were pushed aside. But thankfully, their story is finally coming to light.
And it's thanks to historians, museums, and dedicated individuals that we're even able to learn about the Hellfighters today. Places like the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture play a big role in keeping their memory alive, don't they?
Absolutely. They have a whole exhibit dedicated to the Hellfighters. Uniforms, medals, photos, even instruments from their band. It's a powerful reminder of their legacy.
I like how you said legacy. It's not just about remembering the past, is it? It's how their story continues to, resonate today, how it challenges us to think differently about history and about our role in shaping a more just future.
You got it. The Harlem Hellfighters story is a call to action. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our past, to acknowledge the ways systemic racism has shaped our society, and it inspires us to keep fighting for equality, to make sure everyone has the opportunity to, reach their full potential.
So what does this all mean for us today? How can we use the lessons of the Harlem Hellfighters in our own lives?
There are so many ways to honor their legacy and carry their torch forward.
Mm.
We can support organizations working for racial justice. We can educate ourselves and others about the history of systemic racism. And we can use our voices to speak out against injustice, to amplify the voices of, those who are marginalized and oppressed.
It's about being active participants in the fight for equality, not just passive observers.
Exactly. And it can start with simple things. Read a book about the Harlem Hellfighters, watch a documentary, visit a museum, or even just share their story with someone who hasn't heard it. Every time we tell their story, we keep their memory alive and contribute to a more inclusive and accurate understanding of history.
One thing that I keep thinking about is this idea of them fighting on multiple fronts. They had the battlefield in Europe, but they also had the battlefield of prejudice back home. You can't talk about their story without talking about both of those struggles.
That's so important. The Harlem Hellfighters experience was totally tied to the bigger fight for civil rights in America. They came home heroes, but they still faced segregation and discrimination.
Yeah.
Their fight for equality didn't end when they got off the boat.
You'd think that kind of welcome after everything they went through would cement their place in history, but it didn't happen that way.
It's sad, but no. Despite the fanfare, their story faded from public memory for a long time. It's a tragic example of how history can be, selective, how the contributions of certain groups can be ignored or erased.
Like their story didn't fit the narrative at the time.
Exactly. But the good news is their story is being reclaimed and celebrated. And it's up to us to make sure their legacy keeps inspiring us and challenging us.
Their story reminds us that the fight for equality it's an ongoing thing. There's so much work left to do. But the Harlem Hellfighters showed us that even when the odds are totally stacked against you, courage, resilience, and belief in yourself can change the world.
They were true pioneers, paving the way for future generations to fight for a more just and fair world. And their story is a powerful reminder that we all have a part to play in that fight.
Before we finish up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about how their music helped to break down barriers. Can you talk more about that? I'm curious what you think about music as a tool for social change.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Music has this unique ability to go beyond language and cultural differences. It
Hmm.
can create a shared experience, a feeling of connection that's so powerful. And for the Harlem Hellfighters, their music challenged the way people thought about African American culture. It showed European audiences a new and exciting kind of art, and it forced them to look at their own biases.
So their music was like a bridge between cultures, a way to build understanding and empathy where there was division.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something we still need today. We live in a world where there's so much division, so much fear of the other, but music can bring people together. It can remind us of our shared humanity.
It reminds us that we have more in common than we think, and that we can use art and culture to connect with each other and break down walls.
Absolutely. And the Harlem Hellfighters story proves that they use their music to challenge prejudice, to uplift their community, and to inspire others to fight for a more just world.
It reminds us that change is possible. Even in the darkest times, there's always hope. Speaking of hope, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about as we wrap up our deep dive into the Harlem Hellfighter story. We've talked about their bravery, their struggles, their cultural impact. But what really gets me is this. Amidst all the hardship they've faced, the Hellfighters, they never lost their spirit.
It's like their determination, their belief in themselves, it transcended all the limitations that were put on them.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, right? What if? What if they hadn't faced those barriers? What if they'd been given the same opportunities, the same resources, the same respect as their white counterparts? I mean, what could they have achieved then?
It's a powerful question, isn't it? And it speaks to the immense potential that was just stifled by racism and discrimination. Imagine the contributions they could have made, not just on the battlefield, but in every part of American society.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? To think of all the talent, all the brilliance that's been lost throughout history just because of prejudice.
It reminds us that we all lose out when we allow prejudice and discrimination to limit the potential of any group of people.
Hmm.
The Harlem Hellfighter story, it's a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity, but it
Hmm.
also serves as a stark reminder of the work that still needs to be done to create a truly just and equitable society.
That's so true. And their story isn't just a reminder of the past. It's a call to action for the present. What can we learn from the Hellfighters experience? How can we apply these lessons to our own lives?
I think it starts with awareness, with recognizing the ways in which systemic racism continues to affect our society today.
Hmm.
We need to be honest about our history, about the injustices that have been perpetrated, and about the work that still needs to be done to dismantle those systems of oppression.
And it's not just about acknowledging the past, right? It's about taking action in the present. What can we do to make a difference?
There's so many ways to get involved. We can support organizations that are fighting for racial justice. We can educate ourselves and others about the history of racism, and we can use our voices to speak out against injustice wherever we see it.
And let's not forget the power of simply remembering, of keeping stories like the Harlem Hellfighters alive.
Exactly. Every time we tell their story, we honor their memory, and we help to ensure that their sacrifices are not forgotten. We contribute to a more complete and accurate understanding of history.
And in doing so, we challenge the dominant narratives, the narratives that often erase or marginalize the contributions of people of color.
The Harlem Hellfighters story is a powerful reminder that history is not just about dates and battles. It's about people, about their struggles, their triumphs, and their enduring legacy.
Well said. So to you listening, we encourage you to dive deeper into the history of the Harlem Hellfighters. Learn their names, their stories, their accomplishments. Let their legacy inspire you to be an agent of change in your own community.
Their story is a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. It's a reminder that the fight for equality is a fight worth fighting, a fight that we must all engage in if we want to create a better world for ourselves and for generations to come.
This has been an incredible deep dive. It's amazing how much we can learn from these forgotten chapters of history.
And it's a reminder that there are countless stories still waiting to be uncovered, still waiting to inspire us and challenge us.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of history, culture, and the human experience.